Hello, everybody. You're very welcome to our webinar today. It's an absolute pleasure to welcome you here from all over the globe. I would like to introduce our webinar, which is part of the AHFES project, which is an Interreg project that's designed to support and foster small to medium enterprises in the development of healthy food produces. This is a European project with partners from several different countries: Spain, Portugal, the UK, Ireland. As part of this, we're running a webinar series, and today we have a really exciting webinar lined up looking at what are the key influences on the future of healthy food. How will they influence what we produce as SMEs and what we purchase as consumers? We have three extremely exciting speakers lined up today. This webinar will take about an hour, and to introduce you now, to introduce our speakers, I'm going to pass you over to Joanne Murphy, who's going to introduce our speakers. Over to you, Joanne.
Thank you, Jane, and good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our webinar this afternoon. As Jane mentioned, it is on healthy food, sustainability, culture, and consumer preferences. I'm delighted to host this session on behalf of NUI Galway and the AHFES project. We've had a super response to the webinar with almost 120 people registered to attend, which is fantastic. Many of you joining us for the first time, but lots of you joining us on the third occasion of our AHFES webinar hosted by the Whitaker Institute at NUI Galway. As Jane mentioned, it is part of a series by the European funded project AHFES, which is a quadruple helix Atlantic area healthy food ecosystem for growth of SMEs. It's run by an international consortium with Atlantic area partners from, as Jane mentioned, Ireland, Spain, Wales, France, and Portugal, seeking to improve the competitiveness and growth of SMEs in the value chain of healthy eating and daily life. There's lots of training and supports which are designed to promote the competitiveness and growth of SMEs, providing them with advanced and personalized support services that allow them to innovate in healthy foods and lifestyle. Very excited about today's webinar, which promises to be hugely insightful and informative. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers, and thanks again to Professor Jane Walsh for that initial introduction to our event. Now, before we welcome our guest speakers, some housekeeping for you, especially for those of you joining us for the very first time. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on the AHFES website very shortly. We will be holding a question and answer session at the end of our three panelists. So please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom screen to ask questions, and we will endeavour to get all of those answered within our time frame allocated for the questions at the end. Now, as we get to introduce our very first speaker for today's webinar, please do tell us in the chat box where you're tuning in from. We have a huge international turnout today, so whether you're joining us from Spain or Portugal, Hong Kong, Nigeria, America, or Ireland, we want to hear where you are tuning in from. So now to our very first speaker, we are delighted to welcome Marco Gogianetsky, PhD, who is a strategist, trend analyst, and futurist. Marco joins us from Italy, and he specializes in food and tourism. And through Finanza Futura, a consulting company based in Florence, he provides technical advice and strategic guidance to institutions, trade associations, and industrial companies. And as an independent researcher, he has authored several scientific articles published by major economics and management journals. Welcome, Marco Folce. Welcome to Ireland.
Thank you. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. And let me thank first Jane Walsh for inviting me here to talk today about healthy food trends from a very special point of view, which is transdisciplinarity. So I'm going to talk a different language from usual, let's say. So can I start sharing my presentation?
Yes, please. Fire ahead.
Okay, I think you see it,
yes,
John.
Perfect.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I hand over to you now, Marco. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I will skip the index and just get to the start of this presentation. I will show you a chart here. It is a network of nodes, and this chart has been designed according to Tony Buzan method for designing mind maps. In this map, you have a lot of elements and connections. Connections means easily said, action and retroaction, action and feedbacks. My question to you is, where is food inside this map? You could say, for example, that food is where the node of nutrients is. Nutrients are the basic element, the very important element for life and also for mankind. So you could put a red circle here around nutrients, but you could also have a larger view and include in your cycle food production, farming, distribution, processing, legislation, and of course, animals, plants, and fungi. Or you could even have a larger perspective and include beyond food production, include also the environment, the relationship to the environment. So the impact of food on the environment and vice versa, the impact of the environment and pollution on food. And in the middle, you find also the impact on human health. But you could have even a larger perspective, which is here drawn with a green circle. And this cycle is including everything. So it is including also the upper part of this chart, which is the social space. So not only the production environment, but also the social space. Now, this chart was inspired to me by a sociologist called Poulain, who defined the food social space, and by an anthropologist called Ingold, very famous, Tim Ingold, who defined the ecological space. Now, you can use this chart to visualize the most important European strategy about food, the so-called farm to fork strategy, adopted by the European Union in May 2020. Here is the strategy visualized with this chart. And you have here also the color keys on the left side. On the right part of this chart, in green, you have this food production that I've already described to you. And on the left side, below, so at the bottom, you have these yellow nodes. These yellow nodes is the environment and the impact of food production on the environment. All this is inside the farm to fork strategy. Now, it is evident what is missing inside the European strategy for food, addressing food, the future of food for the next 5 years. It is the social space, and it is in the upper part left. Just a few lines again on this very important document of the European Union called Farm to Fork. It is a 14 pages document that I suggest everybody, every citizen to read. It is called a farm to fork strategy for a fair, healthy, and environmentally friendly food system. So the name already tells a lot. It has got several merits. First of all, it considers food as a system. So it is a network of connections. And this is very important. It considers the planet, mankind, it considers nature, and health of humankind, of course. It stresses a lot the link with the environment, because the document is mostly about food sustainability. So circular economy, and so on. It includes the question of people's health, as I said before, but it has got several limitations. So the first one, it has got an approach, a multidisciplinary approach, but not a transdisciplinary approach. It focuses on economics and nutrition science, and it puts all the faith in the market that is that is in the supply and demand mechanism to solve all problems. Now, I'm going to fill the gap, putting inside also some elements from the social space, which was a bit neglected in this European document. The first lesson I'm going to draw in is from history and archaeology. Healthy food can be considered as a luxury. Let's see. Think for an instant about the appeal of healthy products. According to the farm to fork strategy, consumers want food that is fresh, less processed, short chain, organic, and sustainably sourced. Now, personally, I could add, for example, free-range animals and wild fish catched in clean water, for example. I could add personally natural products, even though it is very difficult to define what natural is. But anyway, all these aspirations, also my aspirations, look like a luxury dream. The dream of something that it's difficult to reach, difficult to get, very expensive, or even vanishing. Humanity has had other culinary dreams in the past. Now, okay, I can imagine this because I don't see this box, but anyway, honey at the time of Pharaoh's Egypt, wheat bread at the time of the Old Kingdom of Israel, game during the Renaissance, and white bread in Europe after the Second World War. All these products were dreams for normal people. So they wanted it, but they couldn't get them enough. So from archaeology, we must keep in mind that luxury goods are meant for the few and not for the mass. And they appear only in societies which are structured in social classes. Now, I will make an example of luxury food that nobody has in mind normally. I'm talking about eggs. So according to the European Union, there are 4 classes of eggs according to the breeding of hens. You have eggs from cages, from barn, free range, and organic. But on the top of these 4 classes, you can put other qualities like antibiotic-free, X large size, short chain production. Of course, all these quality increase the price of eggs. I've checked a pack of 6 eggs in a supermarket in Florence last September, and I found out that in this supermarket, the lowest price was 0.99 euro, okay, less than 1 euro. The highest price was for a 6-pack of organic eggs, and the price was 2.5 euro. It is a huge difference. All these qualities have a cost and contribute to the final price of the product, as well as to our perception of its healthiness. Price makes high category eggs exclusive, like luxury products. On the right side, you see the evolution of the eggs price according to the European Union, and these data are from March 31st, so very updated. It is a report on the price of eggs in the website of the European Community. And you see that on average, the price of eggs in the last 2 years, the pandemic years, was comprised between 120 and 140 euro per 100 kilo of eggs. And from January to March, this price went up to 178 euro per 100 kilo of eggs. So it's a another huge increase. Who is going to pay for this increase? Of course, someone has not got the money, and these are low-income consumers. These consumers will start to consider, in general, eggs something very expensive and luxury, and not even considering the top quality that I described before. Now I will fill in our broader picture also lessons from sociology. Sociology says that healthy food can be a fashion. Healthy foods do express status. They can be an object of desire, a prerequisite of to fashionability. Farm to fork strategy seems to interpret healthy foods as a fashion, trying to strengthen their appeal on consumers and to make them a mass product, something that happened in the past for coffee, chocolate, and tea, for example. This presumption, however, could be wrong. In fact, fashion implies imitation, but also distinction, access for some, exclusion for others. Moreover, the concept of healthy food is not a steady one. It changes continuously, acquiring new meanings. It is possible to argue with a sociologist like Pierre Bourdieu that today's working class, composed by unemployed, underemployed, underpaid, and neat, could just be cut off, not only from healthy food, but also from healthy lifestyles. Here on the right, you have a picture of Pierre Bourdieu, who died in the year 2000. Now we should look also to healthy food from the economic point of view. And, you know, there is this traditional economics, which is utilitarian economics. And the European Commission believes a lot in this utilitarian economics. In economics and other social sciences, preference is the order that the person gives to alternatives based on their relative utility. According to traditional utilitarian economics, persons are expected to act in their best interest, that is, rationally. However, neuromarketing psychology suggests that consumers are far from being rational, have a limited capacity to process information, make often choices by following mental shortcuts, heuristics, as they are being called by Daniel Kahneman, a psychologist who won the Nobel Prize, and that is pictured on the right side here in the slide. The choice between healthy food and junk food, for example, can be oriented by marketing, exploiting heuristics, or by consumers' extra-rational motivation, sociological or psychological. So, in the end, traditional utilitarian economics very often doesn't work for food. Conclusions. Pantrophy. What is pantrophy? Pantrophy, you see a graphical representation on the right side is looking at food from many different points of view according to several disciplines. It is also a holistic and systemic approach to complex issues in food studies based on transdisciplinarity. This methodology has already been experimented in the study of current and future trends in the food sector and to study the role of traditional foods in Italy. Evidence, in our case, of healthy food trends. Evidence suggests that consumers are looking for healthy food. Their interest will grow strongly in the next decade. However, these products may not be affordable for everybody. And finally, in terms of policy, legislators could intervene to increase the healthiness of food in general. In terms of strategy, instead, producers offering healthy but also affordable foods will be in the best position to exploit the new trend. Thank you very much for listening to me, to my bad English. And here you have my recent research activities and publications, someone coming out, being published just now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marco. That was fabulous and very insightful. If I can ask you to stop sharing your screen now, and we'll introduce our next speaker. We'll be back to Marco for our panel Q&A at the end. But next up, it is Professor Maeve Henshin, who is the head of TAGISC, Department of Agri-Food, Business and Spatial Analysis, and an adjunct professor at the School of Agriculture and Food Science, University College Dublin. Maeve's research interests span the supply chain and involve bringing a social or behavioural social behavioural science dimension to multi and interdisciplinary research projects. She is involved in identifying new technology, market and value chain opportunities for the Irish industry and understanding consumer, citizen, industry and farmer attitudes and behaviours that could influence the realisation of such opportunities. Maeve, I'm really excited to hear your presentation this afternoon, so I will hand it over to you. If you just want to pop on the presentation section, the presenter slides there for yourself, and away you go.
Oh, it went off again there, yeah. Okay, great. Thanks very much, Joanne. And I think hopefully my presentation will complement what Marco said earlier on. I think it's very much kind of music to my ears. I think that holistic perspective that he has as well. So very much appreciated that. So thank you very much, Marco. So yes, so thank you very much for the introduction, Joanne. I'm delighted to be here this afternoon talking to you about healthy food trends, sustainability, culture and consumer preferences within the AHFES project. The title of my presentation is a presentation of two halves. That's because in the first few slides, I'll be talking about animal-based foods. And in the second kind of lot of slides, I'll be talking about plant-based foods. And I suppose the reason I do that is to emphasize the need to think about food a little bit more holistically, to think about diets as opposed to individual foods, to think about value chains and wider food systems as well. So this is just some work we did recently, and really I'm using this graph just to illustrate while there may be particular trends that are kind of seen generally and accepted generally. There are various nuances over time and within individual countries that we need to reflect on as well. And this slide was related to beef consumption, because as we all know, beef consumption is very contested at the moment. And there are a number of recommendations to reduce meat consumption, and particularly red meat consumption, for sustainability reasons. And this graph here looks at meat consumption over time in the EU 27 and in the world, and then a number of selected countries across Europe as well, just for comparative purposes. And I think that broadly we can see, if we look at the bottom line, the kind of purpley one, that's the world, that's kind of a general downward trend. If we look at the next kind of one that has a kind of a band on it as well, that's EU 27. Again, there's very much a downward trend. But if we look at the two in the middle that I've put circles around there, that's Ireland and the UK, we see the differential impact of the BSE scare on consumption in these two countries. So while BSE resulted in a downward trend in most countries, consumption recovered fairly well in Ireland and to a lesser extent in the UK. And I think this pattern very much reflects the cultural and social importance of particular foods within different countries. In Ireland, beef, for example, has been mentioned in the history books going back, millennia. And the roast beef and the steak have very much kind of important cultural significance as well. So I think it's just useful for us to see the differential impacts of shocks on consumption as a result of different importances of different foods in different social and cultural contexts. But obviously, even if we take it that meat is going to continue to be consumed, we have to do a lot of work to improve the sustainability credentials of such foods. And this image here, which is produced by the FAO, looks at the emission intensities of different commodities. And we can see that beef has quite a high average emission intensity, but I think it's also very positive to see the significant range that exists around that mean value as well. And what that indicates for us is that there is significant potential to reduce that mean through various management practices or new technologies. So while emission intensities for beef animals are high, there is significant scope to reduce it. In comparison, say, to chicken meat and chicken eggs, the emission intensities are low, but there's less scope, I suppose, to reduce them even further. So I think there's a lot that can be done to improve the sustainability credentials of some of the products that are maybe getting a lot of bad press at the moment. And this is a project that I'm actually coordinating myself. It's an EU funded project. It's called a thematic network, and it very much recognizes the value of knowledge that comes from different sources. So it's not just about knowledge that comes from researchers and universities and public research institutions. It very much recognizes the knowledge that advisors, farmers, input suppliers and others have, and how that if we can bring all of that knowledge together, how we can come up with solutions that help us to address our sustainability challenges. And this bovine project does so by looking at 4 key thematic areas: socioeconomic resilience, animal health and welfare, production efficiency and meat quality, and environmental sustainability. And we have an annual cycle whereby we ask farmers what are their needs under these 4 different areas. We talk to farmers and others to identify good practices where they have addressed those needs. And we talk to research institutions and universities about research that they have done to address these needs. And then we share these back with farmers as well. So there is, as I said, there's a lot we can do. And this project is trying to collate a lot of the research and practices that are already in place to improve sustainability credentials. And that information is shared on what we call the Bovine Knowledge Hub. But as I said, we really need to move beyond individual foods to look at diets and look at value chains and food systems perspectives. And this is some interesting research done by my colleagues in Teagasc that looked at the dietary emissions, at the dietary patterns and emissions of Irish adults. And they identified 3 different clusters. And you will see here they called them the unsustainable, the nutritionally sustainable, and the culturally sustainable. And the green circles on the bottom, they show that the emissions for males and females within each of those clusters. And if we look at the blue cluster, we can see those groups are distinguished as having high levels of red meat and dairy, but they're not the group that has the highest level of greenhouse gas emissions. So again, I suppose, the need to look at food from a wider perspective. There is no point in vilifying one food group unless we understand how that food is consumed as part of a diet, and then the impacts of those dietary patterns by individuals. So moving on then, of course, recognizing that there is a lot of demand for plant-based diets, and that there is that trend for flexitarianism. There are recommendations around diversifying our diets further. There is a lot of research funding and involvement of multiple actors in trying to diversify our dietary intake. And this project called EU Protein is led by Teagasc, funded by our Ministry of Agriculture. And its objective is to re-engineer Ireland's agroecological system through greater diversification and biotransformation of protein sources to deliver sustainability, biocircularity, and quality nutrition. So ultimately, this project will develop new food products as a result of growing new crops, but also looking at different co-processing streams and seeing how they can be used to produce new products as well. So very much, I suppose, it takes a food science perspective, but bringing multiple disciplines together. And it involves a number of food companies and other actors in it as well. And I suppose that's the point I want to emphasize, particularly for SMEs and food companies that are out there. All of these large projects, now this is a nationally funded project, but this project and the EU funded projects that we're involved in, they are all very much looking for food companies to partner with them in these types of projects. So I think there are huge opportunities for companies to get involved in projects that are led by research institutions and universities, and to, I suppose, outsource and to fund some of their own research and innovation activities in that way. This is another project which I suppose is driven more from a nutrition perspective, and it's led by my colleague Lorraine Brennan in University College Dublin. And it very much, again, takes a holistic perspective. It's trying to grow new plant-based crops, ensure that such crops, I suppose, are beneficial from a human nutrition perspective, but also very much thinking about the local economy in which these crops are grown to make sure that they are contributing new income streams or resulting in more healthy soils and more sustainable agricultural systems within those rural communities as well. So this Protein I project is addressing the need to diversify the foods that currently contribute to our population's protein intake, and it will produce new protein crops, assess the impact of these crops and foods on nutrition, environment, the local economy, etc. And this is an all-island project, so we have both Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland involved in this. And we're actually just waiting to sign off on the Horizon Europe project, so a big EU-funded project that also is looking at developing new protein sources for both food and feed, and very much again tying that through to the development of new value chains in different regions across Europe, and very much embracing a multi-actor approach whereby it's not just researchers and universities, but very much all the food companies, the farmers, and all the other actors around the supply chain that need to be involved to bring these opportunities to reality. So I suppose just a few brief takeaway messages from the presentation is really that, you know, countries and regions have unique patterns of consumption based on historical, social and cultural factors. So while there may be a dominant narrative, we really have to unpick the dominant narrative to see what's happening at a more local level, if that's what we're focused on. And foods that are favoured by consumers can be made more sustainable. But when we do that, we really need to look at the overall dietary patterns and see how changes in consumption impact on the dietary patterns, the environmental impact of the dietary patterns overall, as opposed to from a particular individual food product. And there are huge market demands for plant-based proteins, but I suppose the supply of those may be a challenge at the moment. But I think the supply of plant-based sources of protein will increase in the short to medium term, enabling that response to market demands. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Maeve. That was really insightful as well, and great to see that there's a lot of opportunity for some of both our Irish and our international attendees today that might be able to influence some of the research or the activities, or maybe spearhead some of the activities that are happening within Teagasc and some of those international and indeed all Ireland activities that are taking place. We're going to move now on to our final speaker, and I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Gary Goggins, an environmental social scientist working with the Life IP Wild Atlantic Nature Programme, an innovative and ambitious project that is aimed at conservation and management of Ireland's Natura 2000 network of blanket bog habitat. Gary previously worked as a senior research fellow at NUI Galway, a project manager in the construction industry and in the NGO sector in Ireland and Zambia. His main research interests are in relation to sustainable consumption and socio-technical change, and he is also concerned with how knowledge is communicated with policymakers, civil society and industry. Gary, you're very welcome to our webinar this afternoon.
Thanks, Joanne. Thanks for that nice introduction. And I think my presentation will tie in nicely with some of the stuff that Marco and Maeve talked about, but maybe from a little bit different perspective, more focusing on the land and the environment upon which food is produced and how we can work with the land more sustainably to then produce sustainable food, you know, and end up healthy food plus healthy environment. So again, transdisciplinary approach very much to the fore there. So what I'm going to talk about is agri-environment programs and trends in agri-environment programs, and especially in Ireland, where we have had a shift towards results-based agri-environment programs, where now agri-environment payments for farmers are leaning towards more environmental condition and results-based. So better environmental condition will attract higher payments rather than a flat payment rate that we would have seen in the past. And then how that might tie in with other healthy food trends. And the opportunities for SMEs has got the question mark, because I think the audience here will see for themselves, maybe depending on where you're coming from, where opportunities might lie. I'll speak a little bit about what I see, but I think you would maybe have your own ideas there. I'm just going to introduce our project for a bit of context first, and I'll try not to spend too much time on these slides, but we are a European Union funded life project, Wild Atlantic Nature, and it's a long project. It's 9 years running to the end of 2029. with a budget of 20 million, but it's one of these integrated projects which, you know, the big thing here is that we have a remit to attract complementary funding. So you start off with a budget and a bunch of actions, and then you're expected to bring in additional money for whatever is working well or whatever, even following trends in environmental conservation, etc., to attract additional funding. So the overall project's aimed at the management of the Natura 2000 network, and we know from some of our own research in the project that nobody knows what the Natura 2000 network is, certainly in Ireland anyway. 2% of the national population knew what Natura 2000 was, and another 6% had heard of it, but they didn't really know what it was. So there's a lot of work to do there. But the Natura 2000 network is a network of important ecological sites across Europe, and they're protected sites under the EU Habitats Directive or the EU Birds Directive. So special areas of conservation are designated under the Habitats Directive and special protection areas under the Birds Directive. So they would be designated because they've got important rare or vulnerable species or plants, etc. So our project focuses on Ireland's SAC network of blanket bogs. So we work in the west of Ireland. So we're talking about peatlands and very marginal land. So really tricky area for farming and for food producing. We have 35 sites covering about, well, over 250,000 hectares. But about 75 at least % of the land is privately owned and actively farmed. And therefore we really, you know, have to work closely with the farmers and with local communities if we want to see results on the ground, because these, as we say, the farmers are their first responders to the environmental crisis, the biodiversity crisis, etc., because they're the people who work day in, day out in the land, and they can implement the changes on the ground that we need to improve our environmental condition. So just our approach, we've got about 75 or more actions in the project, but we're really focusing on this capacity building idea in the middle, to build capacity among farmers, among local communities, among policymakers, to deliver good results on the ground in a way that works for the local communities. And like each wing of that would include land and ecosystem management, dealing with threats to peatlands and threats to ecosystems on one side. And then on the other side, this education, awareness, outreach, communication, dissemination activities, etc., to make sure that all voices are included and that any decisions work for everybody involved. Most importantly, the people who live and work in these areas and who own the land in these areas. And so, like, to sum up, a key objective, I guess, is to deliver high quality habitats, but they must be sensitive to local context. You know, I think we're all beyond the point of realizing that, you know, a one size fits all is not a way to deliver anything in the sustainability space, because there's so many moving parts and so many different factors to consider. I threw that Venn diagram together for someone last week who asked me what our approach, how would you sum up our approach, and that just sprung to mind. But so, like, policy is really important for us because policy drives actions and then results in certain practices, conditions on the ground. So tying the policy into the practices on the ground and tying that to the place, the nature, the environment, communities, businesses in the area, etc. And then working in that transdisciplinary space in the middle is kind of what we aim for. So that's kind of the background to the project and where we're coming from. And then, well, the need for the project in the first place, and building on this idea of the trend for sustainable food, etc. We would have found that there's a lot of organizational, institutional barriers to environmental improvement, and policy, as I said, is one of the key drivers of land use. And in the past, our policies haven't always aligned very well. There's a tug of war going on there in the middle in the graphic to demonstrate that. And on one end, we have water policy, which over the last 30 years, we've seen a tenfold decrease in the highest quality water catchments in Ireland. So for every 10 pristine rivers we had 30 years ago, we've only got one now. There's a little graph there to show carbon emissions, which, as we know, are going through the roof all the time, despite IPCC continued warnings and another report this week that got Very little media attention due to obviously other factors going on in the world, etc. There's the bar chart there showing the conservation status of our protected habitats, and red is not good, as you can imagine. And so in general, our habitats are in poor quality and in many cases declining. So one of the big things for us is to slow the rate of decline before we actually start to fix anything. And on the other end, we've got a report from the European Court of Auditors who looked at biodiversity in Ireland through the Common Agriculture Policy. And they said that Common Agriculture Policy, agri-environment schemes, and over 1 billion of funding did not do anything to halt the decline in biodiversity. So agri-environment schemes, and a lot of money goes through them, have not delivered what they're supposed to deliver, which for us, we would see as a huge risk to the farmer or the food producer, because if you're taking in money from agri-environment schemes, which are supposed to protect the environment, yet the environment's getting worse, at some stage, the taxpayer is going to shout, well, they'll shout something, but they'll shout that they're not happy to keep paying taxes for something that's not delivering. So one of the actions we have focused on, and this is where we turn towards the healthy food trends and sustainability, is developing an agri-environment program that can work, can deliver, that can work for the environment and for the communities. And here we build on about 30 years of experience in Ireland on results-based agri-environment programs, from the Burn program back in the 90s through to Hen Harrier Pearl Mussel Project, REAP, and now our own project, and coming into the new Common Agriculture Policy. And the idea is quite simple, is that farmers get paid for the ecological quality on the land. So the farmer will sign up for our agri-environment program. We do an ecological survey, or their farm advisor does, which is, it fits on 2 sides of an A4 sheet. We've got a card on the screen there for peatlands. We also would have a separate one for grassland and woodland, depending on the habitat type. But it's very simple, like a card that captures biodiversity, water quality, and carbon capture and storage in an easy way that a 12-year-old could use one of these cards with around 20 minutes training once they know what they're looking for. So a farmer could certainly use one on their own land. But there's a lot of science behind the card, and they're really robust from a scientific perspective, and they capture the environmental condition very, very well. So at the end of an assessment with that card, each field a farmer has will get a score of between 0 and 10. And the better the environmental condition, the higher the score a farmer will receive. And I guess key to that is the farmer gets the result payment for environmental condition, but also if a farmer scores low for whatever reason, there is a separate budget there to help them bring up their environmental condition and therefore their score. So whatever they are losing marks for on that card, there's support there for them to deal with that issue on the ground. So it's a real, and if the farmer doesn't want to do anything on the ground, they don't have to do anything. So it's a real shift away from prescriptive, you know, you must do X, Y, Z, to a voluntary approach where the farmer can make up their own mind. And, you know, it opens up these new markets for biodiversity, water, and carbon for farmers. So as well as just the food they're producing, they can go after these environmental payments as well, depending on prices of produce, etc. So what we would aim towards then is, like, this is just 2 pictures of what a nice peatland that might get a 10 out of 10 would look like. And you see running into the river there, and you would have nice flood management, clean water coming off that peatland, etc. Or a species rich grassland on the other side that would be a 10 out of 10 example of a grassland. And so as well, so, you know, with all the science behind those cards, then we have real, you know, quality assurance that these farms are delivering vital goods. And I would have used this slide before, but now I've just circled food is just part of one of many things that is now being delivered on the farm. As well as biodiversity, climate, etc., and water. But food's very important because, of course, it's a source of income for the farmer. So one question then would be, okay, so if a farmer is scoring high, an 8, 9, 10 on the farm, and they're producing food also on the farm, so they're verified as being sustainable and they can still produce food, so they're really farming with nature, then there must be an opportunity for that food to attract a premium price or a luxury good, as Marco might have it. But as it is now, the price of the animal produced on that farm is based on the quality of the animal, but not the quality of the land. Whereas I think, so you're kind of caged versus your organic in the egg thing, but your sheep or beef or whatever is being produced is attracting, there's no differentiation. But I think there is a real opportunity here for land that's verified to be very sustainable farming and to attract additional payments or add value to that food. So this program is, we're running it last year and this year. And so we've got about 800 farmers in 2022 in the agri-environment program in the West. But the exciting thing, I guess, is from 2023, the new Common Agriculture Policy takes hold and comes into play. And now there has been a shift towards adopting this results-based approach in the Common Agricultural Policy Strategic Plan for Ireland. So this is a huge change at not only the Irish level, but also the European level, and it's attracting huge interest from right across Europe in this shift towards results-based approaches. So from 2023, there will be 20,000 farmers across Ireland in a results-based program. And therefore we have huge data on the environmental condition of farms, and therefore huge opportunity to promote the food produced on farms that are verified highly sustainable as something extra special. You're talking about food produced in designated lands, which are also already designated for a reason, but also if we can prove those lands are in good condition and farmers are still able to produce foods there, then I think it's this story worth telling there. So we've done some other market research on kind of promoting the whole importance of peatlands and these areas, and trying to, the average farm income in these areas is about 13,500 or so, and most of it comes from farm subsidies, etc. So there's a real need to kind of work with the local communities to add value to these areas, to try and drive additional investment, etc. Because it's not very viable for young families, etc., to just be a farmer. You need to also have another job generally if you want to, with the cost of living these days, to survive in these areas. So there's a huge kind of rural development issue going on here as well. And we have been looking at some consumer trends, etc., to see what we can do with this. And we've found like over 70% of the population are interested in sustainable food, and it's something that they would be happy to invest in, things like that. And around the awareness of these type of high nature value lands that farmers are working in. So we've been working with the different farm organizations and with on a few TV programs, and we have the European Commissioner for the Environment there came over to visit us, etc. So there is a bit of traction, but as you will know, it's a very difficult space to work in, and it's a very competitive space as well. So so we are still kind of a work in progress, and we're asking ourselves constantly, well, how do we use this results-based program and where it's going with the new CAP to add value to, what we can now verify very robustly as sustainable food from many perspectives. And, how does the verification through the RBAPs fit in with other programs like maybe your Origin Green or even organic farming or whatever it may be? What about integration with other dimensions? So food, along with tourism, for example, tourists often want the local food experience, or with your habitats, so farming for nature with your food and farming and having good habitats, etc. And then, of course, it requires collaboration between multiple stakeholders, right from your kind of state top-down actors to your bottom-up farmers, communities, and a whole host of SMEs and different, people along the way, Teagasc and Board Bia and whoever else. And then the whole marketing, how do we market this? And, how can you kind of create a niche for yourself in the market, or piggyback on some other trends there in the market already? Is labeling good enough? Maybe not these days, maybe you need to differentiate a bit more, etc. and then tying into education as well, which is very important, so that people, you know, are increasingly aware of where their food comes from. But again, there's a lot of misinformation, a lot of noise here as well. So making it clear to people about where their food comes from, the importance of that, and etc., building on that. So there's some of the areas we're looking at, and I'm sure some of yourselves in your work would have good ideas of how you might tie in with some of this. We've got 10 partners on the project, including Teagasc, Maeve's organization there, and the Department of Agriculture as well. But I think there is huge opportunities going forward, so be interested in other people's thoughts as well in this space. And I have no idea what time, but I usually go over, so I hope I'm not too much over.
Perfect, Gary. Your perfect timing. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Well, that'll be the first time.
Every day is a school day nearly, and that was very interesting. I learned an awful lot about the project and you know, the importance of the sustainability and the farms and how that it's all really connected. You kind of forget that when the food is on your table, that it has had to come from somewhere, you know, and it could be coming from anywhere across the country or indeed further afield. I'm going to invite Marco and Maeve to come back, turn on the camera and the microphone again, and we'll get some questions rolling. And Gary, I'm going to start with you actually. Because, you know, when you're always trying to do something new or when things are changing, it's hard to get buy-in from people to do stuff. So, you know, what has the response been like from the farmers for the agri-environment scheme approach? I know there's financial rewards for the sustainability and the quality of the land and the produce and all of that. But, you know, have you had much of a buy-in, or was there a resistance to change?
Yeah, good question. We started with one pilot site in 2021, and we went for the toughest site that you could possibly have started in the whole of Ireland. And we, you know, kind of said to ourselves, if it works here, it'll work anywhere. So we spent a lot of time, considering it was level 5 lockdown of COVID and whatnot, meeting farmers out and about on the side of the road and talking in the windows of Jeeps and whatnot. And the response was actually brilliant. You know, there was a lot of hesitancy, but very constructive criticism, a lot of great questions, because farmers, you know, as I said, policy in the past, you know, bad policy results in damage on the ground, and farmers have been victims of very bad policy over the years. So of course, they're a little bit skeptical when something new comes along. But I think there was a real appreciation among farmers that the environmental condition is really important, and that's the way that things are going in farming in these areas, and it's going to become increasingly important. And I think they also have seen farm income stagnate at best over the last 40 years, and they're saying, you know, we do need to try something new here. So at the end, there was really, really good buy-in. Like we were looking for 60 farmers in a pilot site, and we ended up with 200. And the feedback we got from them was either we want all in or none of us in. You cannot just pick 1 and 3 of us. So we went and sourced additional funding and we brought them all in, you know. So so uptake has been really good. About 80% of farmers are buying in. Yeah,
that's fantastic. Maeve, I'm going to pop across to you there. You mentioned in one of your slides just the importance of culture and that. And we're looking at cultural differences. And I suppose for some of our attendees today, pivoting or changing a product to tie in with cultural or even religious differences across the world can really impact product development and products in general. How do you see that affecting products that maybe you're working with, or some of the projects that you're working with?
I think that you can very clearly see it in very simple terms of the meat consumption patterns that we've been looking at recently. Obviously, you know, pig meat and beef could have some religious or cultural aspects to them, but chicken is one that's been growing very rapidly. And one of the reasons that it is growing rapidly is because of the lack of any I suppose, religious or other constraints on its consumption. So I think that's, you know, you can see at a very simple level kind of there in terms of what the, you know, the substitutions between the different types of meats as people try to become more sustainable, as they seek convenience. But, you know, those general things that people want in terms of affordability, convenience, you know, they're quite standard. But I suppose it is important to remember that what they look like are different across countries as well. So, you know, we're used to doing our weekly shop, whereas in France and in Italy, probably they're used to shopping much more frequently. So convenience to us would look very differently to convenience to them as well. So there's definitely a lot that can be looked at from that perspective for sure.
And interesting that you mentioned the weekly shop, because I know in Ireland there's been a big uptake in people getting their groceries delivered. So it's a very different atmosphere in terms of the shopping and what you might pick up or where things might be placed on a shelf, because it's not you anymore that's really doing the shopping other than what's online. It's actually the people in the store picking the products. Maybe that's another topic for discussion on another day. But Marco, I was distressed to hear that eggs were a luxury product because we eat so many of them. You know, do you think, based on what you've seen over the past couple of years, there's been a big shift in a change from mass produced products to more locally sourced products in Italy, and especially around the whole farm to fork product consumption? So we just look at eggs, for example. Do you think is there more of a trend in people buying products that are more locally sourced or organic versus mass produced? Oh, I think you might just be muted, Marco, there.
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, it's a good question. And, you know, in the last 2 years, in Italy, people have been spending a little bit more on food. I think they have chosen quality in generally speaking, but they also bought a lot online. So in this case, there is no difference, I think, with other countries' trends. Like this is increasing. Buying online is increasing. This doesn't mean that they're going to buy cheap online. They can also buy very expensive products and healthy products too. I think data are not yet sufficient to be so analytical. I've been watching so large distribution data, and for the time being, they confirm what I said before. So that is the quality as paid, I would say, also for producers betting on quality. But what's happening now with the war is changing this panorama. I think this is impacting our disposable income. So we are all having less money to spend, because we are spending more on energy and we are spending more on normal food. So it's this percentage didn't increase so much in the last 50, 60 years. After Second World War, we have seen just dropping this percentage of disposable income spent for food. And now it's increasing. This doesn't mean that the quality is higher. It's just the inflation. It's the inflation and it's the higher cost of production and of all factors, which is impacting the chain. And then it is on the final price paid by the consumer. So it could be that healthy products, for example, they will have less consumers and less attention for some years because of this war. But in the future, I can say that all mega trends are favorable, you know, because people are paying a lot of attention to what they eat, because they don't trust food anymore. They don't trust food. I know for sure that in 10 years, microplastic will be a source of preoccupation, you know, that everyone will want to know that this is microplastic free. And this is just one example. And the same for light products, what light, you know, less sugar, less fat, and so on. They will pay a lot of attention to this, because they know already that they are related to illnesses, you know. So, and that's a main preoccupation of people, and they will pay attention to this. So there is a growing demand. This doesn't mean that the supply is ready to cope with this. The demand is growing potentially for the future.
Interesting there, Marco, you mentioned microplastics, and Gary, I saw you nodding your heads there. So that really does come back to the quality of the land and the water and everything that our farmers and our producers are creating on the ground for us to eat.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, yeah, as Marco said, it's becoming, you know, I think microplastics were discovered in human blood or something for the first time in the last couple of weeks, and you know, those stories will become more and more frequent. And yeah, I think as you know, there'll always be, you know, Marco spoke about social class, but you know, different incomes, so not everybody can afford top quality food, but I think there'll always be a market for it. But I think in general, everybody will demand better quality food. And if you can verify, you know, of course, there's a lot of criticism around greenwashing in the space and how things are verified and what's counted and what's not as well, you know. So but I think there's definitely trends in that direction. But of course, there's a lot of vested interests as well. So it's going to be a very contested space.
Absolutely. Maeve, my final question for you, and it relates to, I suppose, the news recently about climate change, and Gary mentioned it obviously in his presentation as well. But how can our SMEs and smaller industries inspire consumer confidence in their products and their impact on the environment going forward?
Oh, that's a big question.
Yeah.
Well, I suppose, you know, consumers in some respects feel that it's the responsibility of SMEs and retailers and others to take care of these issues. You know, they don't feel it's their job to address these. I mean, food safety is the responsibility of industry, but I think they also see a lot of these aspects relating to environmental sustainability being the responsibility of industry. But I suppose, to be fair to SMEs, you know, a large proportion of the environmental impact is back at the primary production level, particularly when we talk about livestock. And that's where roles like organizations like Teagasc and the projects that Gary has, where we have to come into play. And I think there's definitely a lot of scope for us to think at primary production level about how we, as we diversify protein sources, how we link plant and animal agriculture better together to have more sustainable use of our lands from an overall kind of perspective in terms of the foods that we produce. So I think maybe for SMEs, it's about sustainably sourcing inputs and demonstrating that to their consumers. There's probably, like, it's certainly, you know, they can you know, use solar panels and renewable energy and all of that, but the biggest impact really in most cases is at primary production level. And I think if the biggest impact that they can have in terms of communicating to consumers is probably around sustainable sourcing, probably.
I just have one more question coming in there, Maeve, sorry, and I'm going to close it after this now because we are just gone over time slightly, but just Maeve, to talk a little bit more about the initiative regarding alternative protein sources very briefly, if you could.
Okay, well, most of what we're looking at the moment is alternative protein sources in terms of plant-based products. And in Ireland, for example, we grow some cereals, but we don't really grow a lot of legumes. We don't grow lentils. We grow some peas, but mostly for animal consumption. So what we're trying to do is upgrade the foods, the crops that we're growing for feed purposes, to use those more for food, and developing new crops. I think there's a lot of scope around that. There's obviously lots of work going on elsewhere around kind of alternative meats and alternative dairies. But I think the important thing to remember is that there is no perfect protein source, you know, so all of these products come with an environmental impact, you know, so they require resources to be produced. They have environmental impacts. And I think we have to be very careful in making comparisons between these alternative protein sources, and to be making fair comparisons, because I heard somebody talking yesterday about, you know, synthetic meat and saying that's the way forward, without considering that there are huge energy requirements to produce the alternative meats in vats. And also there are ethical questions around the growth medium. It's a fetal calf serum that's used at the moment. So there are ethical questions around that. So there is no perfect protein source that doesn't have some kind of environmental impact. And I suppose it's to be careful in terms of where we substitute one thing for another, because there could be unintended consequences if we move too quickly around. You know, we do need to move, but we have to be careful that we don't jump too quickly.
Absolutely. And I guess, as the saying goes, knowledge is power. So if you arm yourself with the knowledge of what you're eating and where it's coming from, then you have the power to make the most correct decision, I suppose, or the most appropriate choice for yourself. Professor Jane Walsh, congratulations on your new professorship. We'll mention it here today. I think this is your first official event as a professor. So congratulations, Jane. And thank you so much for organising and hosting today's event for the AHFES project on behalf of the Whittaker Institute. Jane, we'll give the final word to you. And just before we do, thank you so much to our panellists this afternoon, to Marco, Maeve and to Gary. It's been a pleasure to host this afternoon's session.
Yeah, thank you very much, Joanne, for that brilliant hosting. And That was hugely fascinating and inspiring. Thank you so much to our three brilliant speakers, Marco, Maeve and Gary. A lot of food for thought in all respects there, and some really high level content there. So I'm so glad we've recorded. So a huge thank you to everyone. And with that, we conclude the event.
Thank you so much, Jane. Stay safe, everybody. We'll see you next time. Slán agus beannacht.
Slán, thank you.